Hello everyone, welcome to our webinar on moving to France and buying a French property. My name's Sharon Tate, I'll be your host for the next hour. For the past 20 odd years I've been the editor of French Property News, and I'm also a freelance journalist contributing to titles such as the Sunday Times. I'm joined tonight by our panel of experts who are all eagerly awaiting your questions. If you have a question during the webinar, you should see a panel to the right of the screen. You can pop it there. So before we get started, I'll just pass you over to our panelists who can introduce themselves. We're missing one at the moment. Joanna is just running late, but I'm sure she'll join us when she can. So over to Sharon.
Hi everybody, I'm Sharon Revol. I'm a mortgage broker at Cafpi. Cafpi are France's leading mortgage broker, and I head up the international team here. I've been a broker for 22 years and can help people from all over the world obtain mortgage finance. So I look forward to an enjoyable evening, so I'm a bit tired, and answering any questions. Thank you, Karen.
Thanks, Sharon. And Paulette?
Hi everybody, my name is Paulette Booth. I'm the co-founder and director of AXA International. We're a dedicated English-speaking agency for anybody who wants or needs an English-speaking service. We can help you set up an AXA bank account, insurance, from insurance to accompany a visa application, right up to house and car insurance and everything like that. We cover the whole of France, so happy to be here.
Fantastic, thanks Paulette. And Tracy?
Yes, hi everybody, my name is Tracy Leonetti. I'm a relocation expert. I'm based in the south of France for the past 30 years. And the aim of LBS is really to help you with your move to France from a paperwork perspective. So we're a one-stop shop for everything to do with paperwork. So be that visas and immigration, residency, healthcare, driving licenses, car registrations, utilities, the whole shaboodle, as they say. So reach out to us if you need support with that important move.
The dreaded paperwork. Thanks, Tracy. And over to Amanda.
Oh, hi everybody. My name is Amanda Johnson. I am an international financial planner with the Spectrum IFA Group. We've been going since 2003, and I can help people plan their move to France with regards to their assets and talking about inheritance tax planning, taxation, and all of those bits and bobs that nobody likes to talk about. So, yep, so that's me.
Yes, tax. Nobody wants to talk about it, but we all have to do it. So thanks, Amanda. And finally, Jonathan.
Thank you, Karen. Yes, good evening, everyone. My name's Jonathan.Watson. I'm a currency dealer for Lumon, international payment specialist. So I've handled the currency side of international property transactions for 15 of our 24 years of being in business, predominantly in France. So as well as a thorough understanding of the French buying process, I'm also very interested in the FX markets. And I once appeared on BBC News discussing Brexit with Clive Myrie. One of the things we like to do at this time in our webinars is actually find out a little bit more about you, our audience. So you should see a poll on your screen now, just relating to when you might plan to start looking. As you probably be aware, buying a property overseas, it doesn't happen overnight, and to really try and get you some of the best information from our expert panel, it's quite useful for us to understand where in that process you could be, because there can be different factors to consider depending on where you might be in that process. From the sort of offer accepted stage to the completion, you can be talking about a good sort of 2-3 months, maybe longer in some cases. So yes, just helpful for us to have that information. So thank you very much, everyone who's answered that poll. And I'm just going to launch another one in relation to the financial aspect. Thank you for the previous feedback. And yes, the financial aspect is quite important from a currency perspective, because exchange rates are changing literally every second, day by day. So when you're talking about that sort of 3-month period from putting in the offer and then to completion, there's a lot that can happen in the currency markets. So there's lots of different factors to consider there, and also lots of different options that we can offer to try and lock in and secure a rate to try and help manage the budget side of things. So very high turnout there. Thank you very much, everyone who's answered that poll. I'm just going to launch our final one. Thank you, audience, for your participation. And it's just in relation to where you might be joining us from. Of course, it doesn't matter where you are in the world, the buying process in France is going to be exactly the same, but there can be slight nuances depending on where you're located when it comes to some of the points that we'll be talking about. So yeah, thank you very much, everyone. Looks like about 50% from the UK, but of course our friends in America also looking in France and others around the world. So yes, thank you very much, everyone, for answering those polls. And back to you, Karen.
Thanks, Jonathan, and thanks everyone for answering our polls. Right, so let's get started with a rather topical question, which I think is one for Amanda. Lisa wants to know, what are the implications of the UK budget on British expats living in France?
Oh, okay. So yes, it is very newsworthy at the moment. The two main ones that I think will affect more, the British people, is the changes in pensions. Okay, so the first one is if we have a look at the types of pensions that people have. Okay, so you either have what they call a defined contribution benefit scheme, or a defined benefit scheme. Okay, so one's like a final salary where the money is paid to you as an income when you retire. Okay, the new changes don't affect those at all. So it's just if you've accumulated some money in your pension pot. What's going to happen now, and it's effect from the 6th of April 2027, is any money that you haven't spent by the time you die will be subject to UK inheritance tax. Okay, so that's changed quite dramatically. Now, if you leave the money to your spouse, then there's no UK inheritance tax. But if your spouse has already died, or you want to leave it to your children, then you really need to speak to a professional like myself, and we can work out ways that you can change things so that the UK don't have access to that as part of inheritance tax. So, and bearing in mind that you do have an inheritance tax allowance, so it's anything above that. Okay, so that's the first one. The second one on pensions is to do with a qualified recognised overseas pension scheme, which you might well have heard of, which is called a cure-ops. And that changes on that came in straight away. So if you have a new application since the 30th of October this year, then you will have to pay a 25% tax to the UK government for moving your pension away from the UK. Okay. If you've already got an application going through that was done prior to the 30th of October, that's got to be completed by the end of this tax year in the UK, not French tax year, UK tax year. Otherwise, a 25% tax will apply. Okay, so those are the big things, the big changes. And again, it's something that I'm able to help people on a case-by-case basis.
Lovely, thanks Amanda. Before we go on to the next question, I just want to check, because I think Joanna may have joined us, but on audio only. So if I just double check, Joanna, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can, Karen, thank you. I've unfortunately, the link isn't working on my laptop, so I can't get it to work on the laptop. So I've only got the phone, which means I don't have a camera, but I am here.
Okie dokie. So we'll still ask you some questions that when they come up. Do you want to quickly introduce yourself, because you missed out on that earlier?
Yes, sorry. Hi, yeah, I'm Joanna Leggett, so I'm one of the Leggett family and a director in the business. We've been running for over 22 years now. We cover the whole of France, so we've got agents in every area, so we should be able to help you for wherever you're looking, and we offer a hand-holding service from start to finish. And we obviously can have a look on our website and see the properties that we have there.
Lovely. Okay, well, while we've got you on, Joanna, I'll quickly ask you a buying question that's come in. Steve Rochford says, what is the best way to arrange property viewings during 1-week visits to France from another country?
Well, with us, it's quite easy because we have a sales support team in head office. So what you would do is you'd go online, you choose the properties that you like, and you would send them to a contact, or you'd inquire on them from our sales support team. Then you'd have one person in sales support that would look after you. So they take all your criteria, they send it to all of the agents that are in the area that you're looking at. They would send back some properties for you to start making a shortlist. Then once you've got a short list together of the properties that you want to see, the sales support person and the agents that might be involved in showing the properties will put together an itinerary for you, because they'll know the distance between the properties, etc., how long it's going to take, because bearing in mind France is very large. So they put together an itinerary of where you've got to be, where you're going to meet, and possibly to do maybe 3, maximum 4 properties in a day. Otherwise there's too many and they'll all become one. So that's how we would do it.
Lovely, thanks, Joanna, because as you say, France is, it's a big country, and there can be long distances between some of these villages that you might not realise when you're just looking at the map. So it's good to hear that someone on your end is organising all the logistics.
Yes, that's right.
Lovely. So, okay, we've had lots of questions already from people about living and working in France. So here's one for Tracy. In fact, we've got a couple of questions here that are related to each other. Louise Bailey says, I'd like to have my main residence in France and still work part-time in the UK. Is this possible regarding visas and tax? And Carl Barton says, since Brexit, can I have France as my main residence and work there too, just 2 or 3 days a week in a basic job, e.g. a supermarket? So that's two, both living in France, but wanting to know about working in France and the UK.
Okay, so yeah, very interesting question, Louise and Carl. Yes. So first of all, Louise, so let's just take a look at this. If you move into France as a resident, and of course that means you need a visa to come to France, but if you're saying that you'll continue to work in the UK for a few days, so you're not going to be working in France at all, this would be possible, of course, so long as you're not simply working in France. So what you could effectively do would be come to France on a long stay visitor's visa, so that's a non-working visa. So you come to France, you apply from the UK, you come into France as a non-working visa. You would validate that in France, of course, you were each year in France, and then what you'd be able to do then is, of course, go back to the UK and working from the UK for your UK company. So effectively, it means you're working in the UK occasionally, but that doesn't affect you from a work perspective in France. It does, of course, mean from a tax perspective, and maybe Amanda might have some say on that, it means that that overseas income in the UK would have to go on your French tax declaration, because of course you would be classed as a French resident with your residence permit, so you would have to declare the tax in France. But there is a double tax treaty in place, and again, that's more Amanda's field than mine. So I think it's good to touch base on as well, if however you was working in France but for an overseas company, so this could be useful for Louise, but for other people in the replay, you can't work in France for an overseas company unless you're registered. If that overseas company registers you in France as an employee and pays your social contribution in France, so that's something is very different. So there's the element for Louise where she's working in the UK, living in France, the resident, not a problem. But if you're going to be working in France for a UK or an American company, any company overseas, that company has to register via the CNFE process, which is basically the French National Centre for Foreign Companies. You register with the AXA, appropriate social contributions. That's basically the healthcare and pension contributions. So that would have to be done obviously on a basis. And you would need the proof of registration for your visa to come into France, because of course working in France you need a work visa. So that's Louise, and for the people with those type of questions. And I think it was Carl you said. So so Brexit, yes, has changed your freedom to work in European countries without the appropriate working visa. So it is a little bit more complicated, but it is doable. Obviously, you'd have to find somebody who was going to want to employ you first of all. So you can't come to France and look for a job. If you want to come to France, you'd have to have somebody who wants to employ you already. So your future employer would need to apply for a work permit for you. The work permit process really has a few steps to that. So your future employer would have to advertise your position in the job centre in France for 3 weeks, and proof has to be provided so that you can get a work permit. Once that goes through, of course, they have to show that you'll be the person that they need. Because, you know, if you're working in a supermarket, they may have people that are already qualified for that. So the job position has to be quite specific for you. But if that goes through, once the company gets the work permit for you, you would then apply for your salaried visa in the UK or America, depending where you're based, with that work permit and of course your work contract and other documents as well. So you'll get a salaried visa to come into France, and then it gets changed into a salaried work permit and residency card. They're very complicated situations that we discuss, and of course I can't go into great detail for you. So if it's something that you're serious about, do reach out to me outside of this, and of course book a meeting and we go through it in more detail, look at the project and put the right solutions in place for you both. Hope that helps.
Great, thanks Tracy. As you say, it is complicated, and it it needs more time than a few minutes, but we unfortunately can't spend the whole hour on it. You could, I'm sure, talk the whole hour on it easily. There's a lot to talk about. One for Paulette now about healthcare, which a lot of people are interested in. Oh no, sorry, I completely read that wrong. It's not healthcare, it's about banking, which people are still very interested in, maybe not so worried about. Nick and Annette Reeve want to know, can we open a French bank account without being a resident, and if so, how? And Mandy Engel-Carty says, how can an American open a bank account without utility bills and other items? We've tried to no avail. So obviously with that last comment, they've had a lot of frustration trying to open a bank account.
Yeah, so if we look at the part for being a non-resident, which would apply whichever country a client's coming from, it can be difficult to open a bank account when you're not resident. So I can tell you kind of how it would work with an AXA bank account, that if you're not resident, if you haven't got what they call like an economic interest in France, then we won't open a bank account for you. And I think that's pretty similar with the majority of banks in France. To actually get any economic interest in France, for the main part as a non-resident, that's somebody who's buying a property in France. So that then gives you that economic interest in France. And certainly we can open the bank account as soon as you've signed the compromis de vente, which is like exchanging contracts, because that's a legal contract that you've signed. So we can get the bank account open from that point. So if somebody's currently non-resident and is going to stay non-resident, that's fine. We can open the bank account with your foreign address on, and the card will be posted to your foreign address. If you're moving to France for it, so you're currently non-resident but you're buying a property and moving to France to be resident, we can send the cards and everything to your address where you are now when you apply, and change the address to your French address once you're in France. It depends on everybody's situation. If you're moving, say, to work for an employer, that's an economic interest in France. Or you're buying a property to rent out. So anything that kind of is going to give you that French tax number, really, is the point at which we can open the bank account for you. In terms of Americans, it can be difficult to open a bank account, and not every bank in France will open a bank account for Americans. The good news is AXA Bank will. But the same rules apply, that if you're non-resident and you've got no economic interest in France, so no utility bills and things like that, it can be difficult. But as I say, if you're buying a property, American or not, yeah, we can open an account once you've signed the compromis de vente. If you're moving over, that is more difficult, because obviously, say if you're moving over and you're going to rent a property, then you don't own a property, you haven't got utility bills, that can be really difficult. But once you've actually moved over and you've had your visa validated and becomes the titre de séjour, things do open up and it does become a lot easier. It can just be that first few weeks when you first move over. Yes, it can be difficult, but it depends on each situation. We will always do what we can to try and find a solution to work around it for you.
Thanks, Paulette. That's really interesting. Okay, so let's see. We have a question about mortgages for Sharon. Kate Whitfield says, if you have a limited UK company, is it better or even possible to get a French business mortgage?
Okay, thank you. Lovely question. As French mortgages are only available to individuals or French entities, such as property holding companies in France, such as an SCI or a salle de famille. So they're only for what we would call patrimonial purposes. So as a way of holding estate and managing personal estate. So either a mortgage in a personal name or through one of those structures. A French bank won't lend to a UK limited company, which is a commercial company and not a way of holding estate for kind of inheritance purposes or asset planning, which is how they're used in France. So if you have a UK limited company, you would still be able to get a French mortgage, but in your own names or via a French property holding vehicle. If the property was in your own name, actually whichever way you hold it, you have to meet the criteria for eligibility for the mortgage yourself personally, so whether that's you hold it in your own name or in a company structure. So that means you have to meet the criteria in terms of debt to income and financially being eligible for the mortgage at maximum age of the end of the mortgage, etc. In terms of what income the banks will consider for a limited company, somebody who is the director of their own company, is they will take an average of 3 years of your last 3 years income, and that's on your personal tax returns as opposed to your company tax returns. So they will look at your dividend income and salaried income from that business and then do an average over the 3 years. If your business is very recent, then I'm afraid you would still need to wait 3 years before being able to apply. It's always a little bit more complicated. Not all banks will lend to business owners. So you would need to kind of check in advance to make sure what options would be available to you, because depending on which banks could lend to you, there may be a minimum mortgage amount that you would need to respect, or other criteria such as having collateral pledged to the bank throughout the time of the mortgage. But yes, in a nutshell, it is possible, but it's not possible for a UK limited company to borrow in France. I hope I've answered the question as well as I can in the short time, but do feel free to get in contact if you want to look at it further.
That's great. Thanks, Sharon. And we'll just say a quick hello to Joanna, who is on the screen now rather than just a disembodied voice. I'm sure we'll have more questions for you soon, Joanna. So we've got a question now on foreign exchange for Jonathan. How does Lumon know what the rates will do in the future and when is a good time to buy? So, yeah, I've been wondering that too. Have you got a crystal ball over there?
It's a bit cloudy, I'm afraid, Karen, but a very popular question. And unfortunately, as hopefully some of you are aware, and if you're not, one you should know that I can't personally answer, and that no one on this planet can. No one knows exactly what the rates are going to do. I still get some clients thinking that there's some sort of magic solution to this. There isn't, I'm afraid. Currency rates are moving every second, and it's just a reaction to what's going on in the world. It's political factors, economic news. As things change in the world, the market then reacts to that. And as of yet, no one can fully predict the future. So that's why no one can fully predict what the rates are going to do. Having said that, we can give clients some really useful detailed currency forecasts based on what we think or could happen, and what some learned banks and other financial institutions, they have these big research teams, and they do produce forecasts. And again, no one can say exactly what's going to happen, but we can look at some of these future events that are coming up, political events, economic events, and then look at these forecasts, share all of that with the client to try and help give them some information. So give an example of all of this. We're talking about pound-euro levels over the next 3 months. By the way, pound-euro levels have just hit a 2.5-month high, sorry, 2.5-year high. So a very good time in many respects to be buying euros. So one of the questions there was, you know, when is a good time to buy? Well, for some people, that's going to be a really good time to buy because it's a 2.5-year high, the rate's gone up, and their properties become a little bit cheaper. Does that mean they should? Well, that's got to be your personal decision. Some clients have locked in at those highs. For people who think it might go higher, and there's some forecasters that would agree with you, there's some forecasts that think the rate's going to go 2 cents higher. There's some that think it's going to go 4 cents lower. So it really does come down to you, the individual client. And what we'll do is have a detailed discussion with you. You could be on a really tight budget. You might not want to take any risk of the rates going lower, and hearing that it's a 2.5-year high would be excellent news for you, so we can help you to lock in at that. That'll be a good rate for you. For those who think it could get better, then we'll keep in really close contact with you, letting you know exactly what the market's doing, and then it comes down to your choice. So as I say, no one on this planet can tell you exactly what's going to happen, but we can share some very detailed research about what might happen, and then you can decide what you want to do. So I hope that answers the question.
It does, thank you. I'm a bit disappointed you haven't got a crystal ball or some sort of magic system, but I guess we'll have to be happy with that answer.
I'll try for next time.
Okay, so let's take a tax one now for Amanda. Bernard Walton says, can you take the full amount from the sale of your house in the UK to France without any tax being taken by the UK or France governments? And Kate Burns says, once I've sold my London flat, I'll move permanently to France for the proceeds. Do I need to tell the UK tax folk? And I've got a suspicion I might know the answer to that last one. Oh, Amanda? She didn't like the question, did she? She's disappeared.
Oh, I have disappeared. Where have I gone? Oh, hang on.
You're back.
Oh, I pressed the button. Sorry about that. I muted myself and I managed to mute and get rid of myself. Sorry. Okay. So Bernard's question. Can you just repeat Bernard's question for me? Sorry.
Yes, of course. It was. Can you take the full amount from the sale of your house in the UK to France without any tax being taken by the UK or France governments?
Yes.
Kate,
yes,
sorry, go on.
So for Bernard, all you're doing is it's your own money, and you're allowed to move that from country to country. We're not on some weird regime where someone's going to take a bit of it. Not at all. You want to speak to someone like, or speak to Jonathan, not like somebody like Jonathan. You want to speak to Jonathan about securing a really good FX rate. Okay, if you're bringing your money across to Euroland. And Kate's question was, does she need to let HMRC know? You can complete a form to let the tax office know that you've left the UK, no longer a UK resident. It's always a really good idea to let people know where you've gone, because you might have an old pension scheme, and if you don't tell them where you are, they won't be able to find you and pay you. So it's a really good idea to let the authorities know that you have moved. To complete the form, if you go on to if it's for the UK, if you go on to Gov UK website and you type in the search engine that you're moving to France and you want to declare non-UK status, there's a form that you can then download, complete, sign and post. So very simple.
Simple. Great. Yeah. Thanks, Amanda. Okay, so let's take a buying question for Joanna now. A couple of people have been asking about these sort of buying costs. So Ian Fisher says he's interested to know what other costs are involved in a purchase, and also what annual fees you'd pay for rates and property taxes. And Fabrice Yellens says, what is the percentage for closing costs? For example, if a house is 250,000, how much does it cost to close? And again, let's talk about fees, title attorney, notaire, etc. he's asking about.
Okay, there's quite a lot of questions there. First of all, so the closing fees that I would presume is just when the sale is finalised. So it's the act, the final act. So you'll have already paid 10% deposit for the property. So if it's 250,000, you'd have paid 25,000 euros into the notaire's account. Then you're going to have your agency fees, and the agency fees can vary depending on which agent you're using, but they're generally around between sort of 6 and at the most 10%, depending on the value of the property. So that you would have that agency fee to pay on completion, and you'd also have the notaire fees. Now the notaire fees are all of the taxes, so that's including everything, it's your land registry, etc., and everything else, and they're around about the 8% mark as well, depending between 6 and 8, depending whether you're getting a mortgage and things like that. So those are the only costs that you're going to have to actually complete, is the notary fee, the agency fee, and the price of the property. Then you may be asked to pay the pro rata on taxe foncière. So say for example that you're in October or November, you may only have 2 months worth of that taxe foncière to pay, and the tax habitation, that's only for second
Joanna,
home.
Can I just quickly interrupt you? Can you explain to people listening in what those two taxes are, just very briefly?
Okay, so the tax habitation, they've just actually stopped that now. But if you live in your house permanently, you don't have to pay tax habitation anymore. And the habitation tax is obviously for you living there. If it's a second home, then they will charge habitation tax on that second home or property or holiday home. The taxe foncière is everybody has to pay that. That depends. It's much cheaper than it is in the UK if you're looking from the UK. But it really depends on the facilities that you have. Have you got street lights? Are you on mains drains? All of those sort of things. But the previous owner will be able to show you what their taxe foncière was, and if there was tax habitation, what those taxes are. You'd be looking somewhere around like 1,400 perhaps for a 4-bedroom, 3-bedroom house, that type of thing, but it depends on the area, etc. So with tax habitation, whoever's in the property on the 1st of January pays it for the whole year. So if you completed in February, you wouldn't have that tax in the first year, you'd have it in the second year. The taxe foncière, however, as I said before, would be dependent on the month. You'd pay pro rata on when you complete. Sometimes they do ask you to pay that in the notaire's office to the previous vendor for the months that are remaining, because the previous vendor may have paid it for the whole year.
Lovely. Okay, so just to summarise, there's the costs when you complete are the notaire's fees, which include things like the land registry, the agent's fees, and then the taxes you're talking about were the property taxes, which are like council tax in effect in the UK, aren't they?
That type of thing, yeah. Yeah.
And also, Fabrice mentioned an attorney. You can use a separate lawyer as well as the notaire, and of course the charges for that will vary depending on the lawyers you choose.
That's a personal choice. I mean, in the UK, and I'm sure in America, that you may use lawyers all the time for when you're doing property sales. You'll have a conveyancing lawyer, but in France they don't do that. The notaire generally deals with it all, so you don't need to take an attorney, but if you or a lawyer, but if you prefer to have more of a hand holding, you can go down that road, but it isn't essential. The notaire, most sales are just done through the notaire.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Joanna. So what have we got next? Let's have a look. look at another sort of visa type of question for Tracy. Lynn Beaumont Orr says, we have arrived in France. My husband has an EU Irish passport. Mine is UK. What do we do now for him to have a carte de séjour and me to remain? So carte de séjour, residency permit.
Okay, yeah, so very good question. So Lynn, your husband who has the Irish passport, he doesn't need to have a residency card or a carte de séjour. That's just the vocabulary. Carte de séjour, residency card, it's the same thing. So he doesn't need anything because he has an EU passport, so he has no formalities to do from a residency perspective. For you, however, of course you do, and you can benefit from your husband's Irish passport. What if you're already in France, what you should be doing straight away is going online to the ANEF website. So that's ANEF. If you Google that, it'll come up. It's the Administration for Foreigners. And you go onto the ANEF website, and this website really, and this is good information for anyone watching this in a replay, the ANEF website is your go-to website for validating your visa when you come into France, for the renewal of your visas, for your initial residency card request, depending what residency card you're requesting, and for work permits, which I discussed a few minutes ago, for citizenship files. So the ANEF website is a very important website. So for you, go to that website and you'll have to create an account and start your process of the request for residency card attaching to an EU spouse. Now, you don't have a visa number, so you'd have to go to section which is called son visa or son numéro d'adresse. It's basically the section which is saying you don't have a residency card already. So you will go into that section, create an account and start uploading the files. So they'll want to have, you know, lots of different documents, proof of your civil status, that of your husband, your marriage certificate, proof of where you live in, your healthcare, your things like what, you know, your financial situation. All of those documents will have to be uploaded, and then you have to wait for it to be validated by the prefecture, and you will also look for notifications, because the process can take anything from 3 to 6 months. So do check the notifications, because what will happen is they will send you by email an AGREF number, so because you don't have a visa, they'll send you a number you need to use. So do check your notifications, because if you miss your notifications and you don't upload what they ask, then they'll close the file. So be very careful on that. We've had people come to us who are just not sure what they're doing. So for the process to the letter, check your notifications in your inbox and upload anything they need. They will probably ask for translations and they'll ask for bank statements as well. The process, like I said, 3 to 6 months. So be careful on the travel side of things after the 3 months, because of course the 9180 will still apply to you. It might mean you have to restrict your travel after the 90 days until you get your residency card. Okay, so yeah, very good question. I hope that helps, Lynn, and reach out if you need any support with that.
That's very interesting, because I think quite a lot of people think, you know, if they have an EU spouse, they automatically get a right to stay in France, but you still have to go through the process, don't you?
You do, and the process is quite, you know, it's quite a difficult one to do. I mean, the facilities, they can come to France without requesting the visa from the UK, so it makes it easier in one way, but the process in France is still, it's not a formality, it's a very definite process to go through, and it takes a certain amount of time.
Okay, thanks very much, Tracy. So let's move on to a healthcare question for Paulette. As I said, because lots of people are worried about healthcare when they move to France. France has a very good healthcare system, renowned worldwide, but people still worry. And Steve White says he is on a fair amount of prescribed medication. If I move to France, how can I get access to the medication that I need?
Okay, so when, Steve, when you first move to France, obviously you won't have a social security number, but you can still access a doctor. You can still have an appointment with a doctor who can still give you a prescription. You can go to the pharmacy. You will pay for that, obviously, before you're in the French system, but that's fine. You've still got, you know, the right to go and see a GP and access that. Once you've got a social security number, obviously, then that would, the cost of that would be covered partly by the state. However, what we would normally say is bring as much as you can when you first move over. Obviously, get as much as you can from your current GP. It's quite a good idea to Google the generic name of the medication you've got. Then if you do a search on that, you can find out what's the average cost in France of that medication. And also, once you do have a social security number, is it reimbursable by the state? So just so you've got an idea. And obviously, medications can have different names, like brand names. So if you find that generic name, it does make it much easier. But don't be surprised once you're in France and you've got your social security number and you register with a doctor. We found many of our clients, the doctor almost kind of re-diagnoses everything. They want to kind of, go through everything, do lots of tests, and they might actually end up prescribing completely different medication to you're on, or the same as you're on. But don't worry. The cost of medication in France before you're in the system, it's not horrific. It's it's really quite affordable, even if you do have to go to the pharmacy and buy. But say just stock up a bit before you arrive as well, if you can.
That's great advice. Thanks, Paulette. So one for Sharon now from Darren Edgar, who wants to know what life insurance will be needed for a French mortgage.
Okay, well, it's going to depend on your situation, and it's going to depend on the bank, because the life insurance is it can cover you for all different sorts of things. The very basic life insurance will be what we call décès épithelia, which is death and total and irreversible loss of autonomy, which basically means you're either dead or you really can't do anything on your own. You can't do the everyday acts of life, such as wash yourself, feed yourself, etc. If you're a non-resident, that will be the type of life insurance that are required by the majority of the banks for the mortgage, to cover the mortgage. So it's specifically tied with the mortgage, although you are free to take your life insurance with any insurance provider, providing the cover is equivalent. So for example, you could contact Paulette for a life insurance quote, and you can even do that after your mortgage is in place. So if the bank says that you have to take the life insurance initially, know that you are free to change thereafter to another provider, which means that you can save money, and that's under the Loi Lumon rule in France. If you are a French resident, i.e. you're residing and you're earning your income in France and you're on the French social security regime, then the banks may require that you have other sorts of insurance. But it's still kind of under the life insurance umbrella, which is why it gets a little bit confusing, because they kind of lump it all in together. And Paulette, do you feel free to chip in if you want to add anything? I'm just going to try and keep it simple. But if you're a French fiscal resident, well, French resident, and the banks may then ask that you have things like a sort of critical illness or additional cover for losing your employment, etc., all lumped in within the contract. So what insurance is required really depends on your situation. There are a few situations where the banks may not ask you to have any life insurance cover. There are a few banks out there that will do a mortgage without any life cover. So that is possible. And generally speaking, they like you to be insured for the full amount between all purchases, so 100% of the mortgage divided between all purchases. So if you are the main income owner in your household, they may ask that you're required to be insured for 100% of the mortgage, and maybe your spouse, if they're not working or if their income is smaller, only to be insured up to the amount, the percentage that their income represents in the household, maybe 50%, maybe not at all. But it's really a very individual situation, and it's also with regards to planning for your future as well, so that you're covered in case anything happens to you. So it's something I wouldn't advise, just going for the cheapest deal and paying for something to get rid of it, so to speak, but really planning and speaking to specialists. As mortgage brokers, we will quite often put forward what the bank says that they need for you to have insurance-wise, which is why I felt it was important to say that you can change at any time throughout the lifetime of the mortgage as well.
Okay, that's fantastic. Thanks, Sharon. That's
You're welcome.
good. A foreign exchange one now for Jonathan. I'm buying a holiday home. Do I need a French bank account to transfer currency, as I'm not actually moving to France?
Okay, thank you, Karen. The answer to that is no. You don't need to have a French bank account open to send money to France or to actually buy the property. Certainly see that as quite a high list on new buyers on their list of things they want to do. And ultimately, you will have a French bank. Need to set one up, as Paulette sort of explained. They can help, AXA can help to open one once you've signed the compromis de vente, and you'll need it for your sort of bills and utilities. But before you sort of complete, you don't actually need to have that French bank account open just yet for the payments that you'll need to make. Now, Lumon have a solution here. Once you're registered with us, you get immediate access to what we call a Euro wallet. So this is basically, it's a Euro client account. So it's very similar to a solicitor, a notary, any sort of profession where they hold money on behalf of their clients. So once you're registered with Lumon, you get immediate access to this. So we call it a wallet, but it's basically a Euro bank account that you can effectively use for your payments. So paying the property deposit, paying the balance when that's due, and any other sort of bank-to-bank transfers you might need. You might be buying furniture, you might buy a car, building work, anything where you've got to pay someone in France with what they call an IBAN, an international bank account number for that French bank. And you can actually use this wallet to make those payments directly. And generally speaking, that's a bit quicker and easier to use the wallet to make these payments. Let me give you an example. So if you're talking about your completion funds, you're likely going to be talking a very large amount of money, 5, 6 figure, maybe 7 figure sum of euros that you've got to get to the notaire. If you've got that amount in your French bank and then you need to move it to the notaire, just like most banks in the UK and the US, when you're moving a large amount of money, you often have to go into the bank to actually organise the payment. So obviously that can be a bit tricky. You're going to have to make time to go and set that payment up with the bank. There can be extra steps you need to take. You might need to fill out forms or paperwork. And so that's not just in France. That could also be in the UK or US or wherever when you're actually sending money to Lumon. So we have these wallets that can really streamline the payments, again, on a larger amount of money like that. So it was 100,000 euros you've got in the wallet. It's a quick phone call or an online sort of login with us. There's lots of security checks, but it is easy. Obviously, we can't move large amounts like that just at a click of a button. But yeah, there's a couple of security checks, but the money goes out same day, and it should all arrive in France with the notaire within 24 hours. So it's a much faster process. Last year, Lumon transferred money to over 750 different notaires. So we know a lot of these notaires, they know Lumon as well, and it just helps those payments to go through a lot more smoothly. So do you need a French bank account open to buy a property in France? No, you don't. You will get one down the line, but you can use this Euro wallet. It just makes those payments a bit easier.
Lovely. Thanks, Jonathan. So we've got a couple of questions on buying and selling property on the timings. So this is for Joanna. Claire Norman says, we're currently in the UK. How do we match up the selling in the UK stroke buying in France property process for a permanent relocation, as I believe both countries' contracts and operations are different? And Deb Scott says, we need to sell our UK property to offer in France, but what if we see something we love? Can we make an offer and pay no deposit till ours sells? So that sort of synchronizing sales and purchases.
Yeah, it is quite tricky. You can't realistically, I mean, we could ask a vendor if they are prepared to take a property off the market, and you sign an offer d'achat, which basically means you're offering to buy the property, but you can't rely on that. So realistically, I would always suggest to clients that once you've got your property under offer or you've exchanged your contracts, to go looking then, because there's nothing more heartbreaking than you find your dream property and you can't buy it, and somebody else comes along in a position to buy it. It's the same with you selling your house in the UK, because you know you're going to take the person that's in a position to buy. You might get 3 offers, and the one that's the best is the one that's ready to buy and you're ready to move. And it's quite similar in France. And but it really depends on the vendor situation. You know, we can put in a compromis de vente that you are waiting to sell your property in the UK. We'd have to have evidence that it's on the market, etc., etc. But the vendor would have to agree on a longer time frame if it didn't go through. Or, you know, in the UK you can get gazumped and things like that. I'm not sure if that's the same in other countries like America, etc. I know it is in the UK. Very, very unlikely in France, because once the vendor signed the compromis de vente, which is the exchange of contracts at the beginning of the sale, they can't pull out. So it is very, very different. It really depends on the property. My advice would be to, you know, get your property under offer, make sure it's going to be a good sale, you know, it's a safe sale, and then start looking for your property in France. And then we're in a much better negotiating position with the vendor as well, because obviously if you're ready to buy and you're a cash buyer because you've sold in the UK, you're much more likely to get an offer accepted, perhaps lower than the asking price, you know, and things like that. So you're not in a very safe position when you haven't sold in the UK and you're relying on the money from the UK. So there are ways we can do it and we can help, but it's really down to how quickly that vendor wants to sell his house.
Yeah, absolutely. As you say, you don't want to find, you know, your dream property and then lose it because you're not in the situation to go ahead. So, okie dokie. Thanks, Joanna. A tax one next for Amanda. Neil Clothier, I have no idea how to pronounce that, says, what are the capital gains tax laws if I sell my French property?
Okay, so that will depend on, is it your main residence? Okay, so if you're living in your house in France, you're a tax resident here, it's your main property, no capital gains tax. If it's a holiday home, okay, then there could well be the possibility, but you only have to pay capital gains if you've made a profit. So you'll take into consideration what you paid for it, what you're selling it for, and then you can offset certain costs to reduce that capital gains. So you can offset the buying and the selling costs. If you've had any work done by a qualified registered artisan, you can offset those sort of costs, and then there will be a tax due and social charges, but again that will depend on whether you are a retiree and you've got an S1 certificate, so that's for people who it's more UK centric on that one, and then it depends how long you've owned that property for, because it's on a sliding scale. So the longer you've held the property, the reduction that you'll have to pay at the end of the day, but your estate agent will be able to help you work out the costs, as will your notaire. I think that's a simple explanation on that one.
Thanks, Amanda. We've still got time for a few more questions if we run through them fairly quickly. One for Tracy. Charlie Kurtz is a US citizen and wants to know, does owning property help with the visa process?
Okay, so nice to have an American asking questions. That's great. And yes, we do help Americans if that question is going to come, because we've been getting that the last few weeks. We've worked with Americans before, we worked with the British. We've been doing this 15 years. So obviously visa process for Americans is very similar. Same process for anybody who is non-European. You have to apply via the France visa website. You have to request your appointments, consolidate your file with all your documents, and then once you receive your visa, depending what your visa is, there'll be a validation process to go through. So the same process, whether you're American, British, Australian, you know, from New Zealand, the process is very similar. What changes maybe the documents, the timelines. That's just a quick overview on the process. I know we don't have much time. And then renew in France, of course. Concerning the property, so obviously when you go through the visa process, you need to have an address in France for your visa application. So that is the important part of it. Now, whether owning a property is more advantageous, I would say yes, from if you're a cash buyer, so as Joanna just recently said, you know, having no mortgage and being a cash buyer means they'll take that into account from the financial criteria. So it could be an advantageous situation to be in if you're the owner of a property in France and not just renting. It shows you've invested in France as well, so that's great. And Joanna and the whole Leggett team can help you with that. And of course, Jonathan on the whole transferring of funds thing. So that would be great. So does it help you from a financial perspective? Yes, because A, they'll take into account that you don't have a mortgage and they will see that you're invested in France. However, from a legal perspective, you don't have to own a property in France to get a visa. You just need to have an address in France. So it's more, you know, if you've got an address on your visa application in France as a rental person or you're living with somebody, that can work. But yeah, if you own the property, it's better from a financial situation to show that you've actually invested and you don't have to pay mortgage and things like that. So it would help.
Okay, lovely. So it would help, but it's not an automatic, you know, own a property. It's not an automatic route to a visa. So
Yeah.
Paulette, one for you, if you can run through this one quickly too. What are the health insurance requirements for a long stay visa, and does travel insurance count? And that's from Michael Richardson.
Okay, so certainly in terms of the health insurance, it needs to cover a minimum of 30,000 euros of health cover, include repatriation, and it must be valid for the full 360 days of the visa period. Travel insurance generally isn't accepted. Travel insurance is designed, it's unlikely to cover the full 365 days. For a start, you can get like an annual travel insurance, but it's got a limitation to usually 6 weeks or 90 days. So it's not likely to cover the whole period continuously, and generally has a clause that you need to return to your home country as well. Whereas when you move into France with a long stay visa, you're moving here to live. And we would absolutely recommend that, you know, I can run through and tell you that the policies we provide cover those minimums, but I'd absolutely recommend that you speak to somebody who's a specialist on the subject, like Tracy, to make sure that you're going to get that visa. You don't want to apply. Oh, and a little tip, make sure that your health insurance doesn't start before your visa appointment, because you can't cancel it then. So you need to set it in place, get it set up, but with a start date after your visa appointment. So if it's declined, you can get your money back.
Great, top tip. Sharon, quick fire mortgage question for you. Is it better to buy with a French mortgage or cash?
Well, I'm going to say a French mortgage, because when you buy without a mortgage, if you then change your mind in the future, in a couple of years' time, you can't then remortgage and release the equity from the property. So if you're going to buy a property and you maybe need time to think about what's going to happen, etc., in the future, it's best to buy with a mortgage and then pay it back if you decide that you don't need it anymore, rather than discover that you have to sell your property to get your money out of the property. There is one exception, is that you can do what we call a post-finance mortgage in the 6 months following the purchase of the property. For when you sign the acte authentique, which is the final deed at the notaries, you then have 6 months to kind of get the mortgage set up if you wish to have a mortgage. So if you're in a situation where you have to buy quickly, you can still buy quickly, and then you can do a post-finance mortgage, but buy with a mortgage.
That's interesting. Thanks, Sharon. And Jonathan, last question, quick foreign exchange one. We're buying a house in France. What's the best way to transfer the deposit and final payment on completion?
Okay, thank you, Karen. And yes, apologies, there was a slideshow there to have all the presenters' contact information, but my PowerPoint has just crashed, so apologies for that. But everyone watching, you will get all the panelists' contact details directly. In terms of making that deposit payment, the wallet really is the easiest option. It's just so quick to set up a trading facility with Lumon, and within minutes you can be trading, and then you can send that money out same day direct to the notaire. Funds arrive within 24 hours. There's no receiving fees or transfer costs. So it's just very simple and straightforward. So you can open a French bank and try and do it that way, but can you imagine trying to fiddle around with French online banking when you've got a million and one other things to do? Might not be the easiest thing in the world for you. Save that for later down the line once you've bought the beautiful place in France and you've got a nice glass of wine and you can enjoy it all a bit more.
Lovely. Thanks, Jonathan. Okay, so we've come to the end of our hour's webinar. The next one will be on the 22nd of January. You'll receive details by email about how to register for that. You'll also receive a recording of the webinar, which is really handy if you want to listen to any of the answers again or if you missed anything. Sorry that we didn't have time to answer all of your questions, but all our panelists' details will be sent to you. You will, if they're not on the screen by the end of the webinar, they will be sent to you in an email, and they're all very happy for you to contact them direct. So I'll just hand over to the panelists to say their farewells. So Joanna?
Yeah, sorry I joined you a little bit late. So do contact us if you've got any questions at all. We're here to help you. We won't see you now till after Christmas, so have a lovely Christmas. And also, just after the webinar on the 22nd, we're actually at the France show in London. So if any of you are in London or want to come and chat with some of us, we will be there as well. So have a great Christmas and speak to you all soon.
Thank you. And Sharon?
It's been a lovely evening. Thank you very much, everybody. I hope the answers to the questions, especially on mortgages, have been helpful. My advice is if you are going to purchase in France and you will need finances, get in contact with a mortgage broker such as ourselves before you start visiting property, because it will avoid disappointment and it will help you target properties that are within your budget. So planning ahead is really, really important. I will reiterate what Joanna said. I hope everybody has a lovely Christmas. It doesn't feel possible, it's already upon us, but see you in the new year.
Thanks, Sharon. And Paulette?
Yeah, thanks everybody for listening. Don't hesitate to get in touch for your insurance and banking needs. We'd be happy to help. All of my team are English speakers, so we can help you there. We're also going to be at the French Property Exhibition in January, so I hope to see you there if you want to pop along to Hammersmith. And yes, happy Christmas and see you all next year.
Thanks, Paulette. And Tracy?
So yeah, I can't believe you're talking about Christmas. I'm so not ready for that. So yeah, great, lots of great questions. Thanks for joining. Thank you, Karen, for managing us all. And yes, I will be coming to the show as well. I'll be with Joanna and her team. So one-stop shop. You can do your property and your visa questions, then pop over and see Paulette for your insurance. I'm sure Jonathan will be around somewhere as well. So come and see us all over in January. And yeah, and of course, in the meantime, reach out to us. You can drop us an email and we'll be happy to answer your questions. And yeah, happy Christmas.
Thanks. And Amanda?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Karen, for hosting. Any questions from that haven't been answered, or you think sitting at home thinking, oh, I need to ask that, just drop me an email. We don't charge for any consultations or reports, and I can send you our client charter, and that will explain how we're regulated, how we're remunerated. And have a very Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
Thanks, Amanda. And Jonathan?
Yes, well, thank you, Karen, for excellent hosting as always. Thank you very much to the panelists for all their answers to the questions, and thank you to the audience for joining us. Of course, these wouldn't happen without you. So I hope you found it useful, and yes, you can contact all of the panelists direct. In terms of the currency markets, well, it's the best time to buy in France with pounds in the last 2.5 years. And for our American friends, the US dollar is trading at over a 1-year high against the euro as well. So from a currency perspective, it's a very strong time. So do contact me if you'd like to find out more about that. But yes, thank you everyone for joining us.
Thanks, Jonathan. And I too shall be at the French Property Exhibition. I can't believe I've been going to them for over 20 years. So I hope to see some of you out there in January, and a happy Christmas to everyone. And so for now, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.